Hello, I'm James. Today I want to share with you something that I call the service system. It's built on 7 foundational pillars that I have developed and I would say perfected over the last 40 years from the time I first saw something about leaning. Each one of these pillars are powerful. They're life-changing, but they're also very simple. Einstein said that, nature doesn't like to give up her secrets, but she will if you work hard enough, if you stay at it long enough, she will. And the beauty of nature's secrets, though, once it's revealed, I call it like a house in the woods. These 7 pillars, when you see them and understand them, it's a lot like, this is what I use as an analogy. If you and I were traveling, say, to work together, we go down the same road, and all of a sudden you look over at me and you say, James, look, there's a house in the woods. I've never saw it before. But let's think about it for a moment. Once you see that house in the woods, you can never unsee it. No matter how many times you pass that road again, you've got it. That's the beauty of nature's secrets. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And even like Einstein had these theories of relativity that he got. These were theories. And other people proved his work. But I followed the same thing with Einstein for all these years, nighttime, daytime, morning, when no one even knows how hard I'm working or seeking, trying to get nature to give me some of those answers like nature gave to Einstein. So I've reached a point now where I really do want to share them with you because they've changed my life. They do help me to be centered. They help me to be balanced and help so many others to live that life of intention, to be able to just enjoy life, to have a balance. And so, but they're based on 7 foundational pillars, the service system. Today I want to share one with you, and I call it very simple. It's called Kids on the Line. But today it's going to be interactive, and it's going to be something that I've never done. I've shared it many times. I've seen it change lives. I've seen it change lives and just in the instant. And so what I need you to do, though, is I'm going to be painting a picture on the board behind me, and I'm going to be asking you some questions and saying, oh, here's what I want you to do. So don't think anything is tricky. When I ask you a question, just whatever comes to your mind, whatever you feel, that's the answer I want you to say in your head or write on a piece of paper. But it's so simple. When we finish today, you will be able to share this with your children, share it with your employees. It will also help you. And so I guess we'll get started. So remember, the first time I've done this, so kind of work with me and we'll see what happens. And it's called Kids on the Line. Now, and this is how I did it for the very first time, because in the South, most people know about Vacation Bible School. Southern Baptist is the second largest denomination, and most people are familiar with that. And so I was talking to someone who I knew would understand Vacation Bible School. So this is going to be the setting. So let's pretend now that you and I are in an area, say on vacation, and we see a sign outside of the church, and they say, we need volunteers for Vacation Bible School. And you and I don't know each other. We don't know each other. So we just show up to say, hey, I'll help. And so then we're assigned to a group of kids. They're 8-year-old boys, and we have 6 in our group. And that's going to be the setting. So we're going to have a church. Okay. It won't take long to know I'm not an artist. I'm not a Bob Ross. So now let's pretend that you and I have been working with these kids now for a good while, and I say to you, let's give them a break. Let's go outside and play some. So, and you and I, we said, it's okay, we agree on that. And we go outside, and outside the church, though, they say there's a road down here somewhere, and You know, and there's trees about. And you and I have been talking about things like where I came from, what I'm doing this summer, what you're doing this summer, and some of the things that interest us. And so a few minutes have passed now, and these little boys are just running around playing. Remember, they're 8 years old, there's 6 of them. But I come up with an idea. So, you know what? Let's give them a break, and I don't even know where this comes from, but let's draw a line here. And the idea is going to be, we're going to let these 6-year-old boys come to this line and race to the church. So here's our church. Of course, that's the church. All right. Now, and I want you out there in the audience, I want you to pretend you're calling the boys up. So I'm going to stand back, and so you're going to be calling the boys up and say, boys, come on and get on the line, and we're going to race to the church. And what we come up with is the first one to touch at the church gets $1. It's not much, but it's $1. And so you do that. And so I'm going to give you just a minute to call them up and explain what their deal is. Okay, all right, so you've got that now, and you've done a good job. They're all listening to you, and they like you. So they all come up, and so now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, now we've got all our boys on the line. Remember, it's called Kids on the Line. So when these boys come up, you explain to them what the rules are, and you and I are standing over here. We're just over here. I'm going to say I'm Jay, and I'm just going to say this is Mary, for example. This is Mary. Okay. So I'll use that from now on. I'll just say Mary. All right. So Mary, I want you explain to them, and you've done that now. And look, this little boy has come to the line, and he is leaning so hard. He is really like this. He is leaning toward that church. And the next one is leaning some too. But the rest of them, they're really just kind of standing on the line. So Mary, if you will, maybe you can tell them to kind of give them as a coach something so they all have the same chance, you know. So I'm gonna give you just a minute to tell them, say, all right, boys, whatever you say, get ready or something. So what would you say to the little boys to try to help them all have the same chance? Because this little guy is leaning like crazy. Listen a little bit. Wow, you did a good job, Mary. Look at it now. Now you've got this little kid's leaning hard, and this one's leaning, and this one's leaning some. But these two are still standing straight up. So if you don't, Mary, if you don't mind, one more time, maybe you can say something to these two, you know, to help them. So I'm gonna give you a minute to whatever you would say to kids standing on the line to help them all, you know, to have a fair shot at it. Okay, so and Mary, you really are gifted. I think you just have a gift for kids. It's pretty neat. Now you got this one leaning a little bit, but not this one. I know we're holding this one up, but just one more time, if you don't mind, try to get this kid to lean some too. Because you really have done a great job. You got them all leaning toward this church, you know, to race. And so, if you will, and okay, thank you for what you said. That's pretty good. But Mary, look at the line now. This kid's now looking the other way. He's looking toward the road instead of the church. What can you do now? What are you thinking or feeling now? Well, at this point, we're still holding this little fella up over here because he's been leaning so hard all this time, and now we've been trying to help this child, but now this one is so we got to. What do you think we should do? Just go ahead and let them race? Okay. Well, let me ask you a question now, and I realize this is a church thing, and I may not have done this right, but I'm going to do this anyway. Like, who would you bet on to win? I'll bet you $5. If you had to bet $5, which one would you bet on, Mary? So it's probably this one. All right. So we just got to go. So now, if you will, go ahead and tell the boys, race, boys, go to the church. And off they go. Not this one, but off they go. This little fella is leaning, and he's made it to the goal. And you can see kind of how it worked. But this little fella is still looking the other way. Now, what I want you to see in this is that everybody that I've done this with, I'm going to switch back now to some of the history of sharing this story, because I obviously can't get immediate feedback from the folks out in the audience like you that are helping me going through this. When I've done this so many times, this little fellow here is leaning the most. Everybody just has the sweetest kind of, you can just feel the energy. I just spike in from the very first time I say he's leaning toward a goal. And then you got notice on this line you got kind of a graduating line here. The greatest leaner down to a kid now going the other way. Well, I'll share a story with you about kids on the line. And before one of the things I did in sharing the kids online, I showed this one time at my conference table to a patent and trademark lawyer who I knew very well. I knew he was a very straight shooter. So when I showed him the kids online, I said, I'm going to show you the greatest tool that anybody has ever created to understand human nature and how we really work. And I recall him leaning back away from me when I said that. Remember, I said it's the greatest tool anybody had ever invented or developed to help explain human nature. And I told him that day before I showed it to him. So I went through and I had him answer the questions like you. And he did it. He would say, come on, boys, get up here, give them talks. But when he finished, when we finished with it, he looked at me, and I knew he was going to be honest about whatever he thought about it. I knew that for a fact. Even though he looked at me like, in the beginning, like, sure you can do this. But what he said was, though, it's more than you said it was. So follow me on this, and I'll tell you how important this is. This kid gets the kind, think about the leaner. This is a leaner kid. This is the kid at school that the teacher gets those kind words. These are the ones who gets a smile. These are the kids who get that reinforcement. These are the kids who get the support. As this line graduates, that changes. And sadly enough, this kid is the one we don't know what to do with, not naturally. We have to be trained to deal with this kid. And sadly enough, this kid who we don't know what to do with is ones that we put into prison. I'll tell you how that works. In America, we put more people in prison than any other democracy per capita. I was showing this to a young Amish man one time. And I always love at this point when I can tell somebody, you've done so well. Look, you've got kids leaning. You're a good coach. You're a natural. And then I say, uh-oh, look over here. You got one that's going the other way. What are you going to do now? And I think he gave me probably the best answer probably ever. And he said, James, and he had that strong Dutch accent. He said, James, I would tell him to go back into the church. I've done this many, many, many times. Men, women, all across income levels and educational levels. But what I found is everybody wants this child out of their sight. Remember, the Amish man was not being unkind. He was saying, I want him in the church. Because we don't know what to do with him. That child makes us uncomfortable. And sadly enough, this is where school shooters come from. These are the people who want to get out of our sight. We need to change that, though. We need to change that. And as I said, this child, you cannot give this child the same kind of facial expressions, that warmth and connection that you do this guy. Not naturally. You have to really think about it. But this child won't receive it as well either. Now, you might be dealing right now with, say, children in your home. You may think, God, I don't understand it. My little boy's working so hard. He's this kid. And I just don't know what's happening to this little fella. Well, if you listen to if you listen to yourself, the tone changes. This could be a child in a home. This could be an employee. This could be, and I'm going to explain this even on a much bigger, say, national level or international level. But you can't give, as I said, you can't give that sweet kindness. And as I've done this, I've had people start calling these kids names. They're 8-year-old boys, but they'll start calling names. They'll say, "Get it." I want to turn them around. So no, you can't touch the kids. You can't do that. And so what I want to show here is that we naturally pull for this child. I've never had anybody, let me take that back. Maybe out of all the years I've done this, there was one or two that said, I don't know, maybe one of these others might just win. Almost everybody says, I bet $5 on this kid. And if you remember how I presented this kids on the line before I started, was I said, we don't know these kids. We don't know their abilities. And can I tell you something else? Remember I said how people bet on this kid? And here's another point. This is just the power of leaning toward a goal. See, maybe it's a good time to tell you, the church is just a goal. The church is a goal. This is nothing about religion, nothing about politics. It's just trying to tell you when someone is leaning toward a goal, leaning toward where we're comfortable, where they're going, we can't help but be supportive. We want to be. But the opposite is true the other way. Now, let me try to explain this in something that we've seen is going on right now. In the 2024 election, remember, I want to make sure you understand this. This is not meant to be political. It's not to be anything but trying to explain to you one of the pillars of the Sardis system. This kid, I call this a leaner kid. This is Donald Trump. Donald Trump had a goal to be president of the United States. He made that clear. And he worked on that goal every day. You could see, like, okay, he's doing another rally. He's over here, he's over here. In this last election, this has turned out to be Joe Biden with the Democrats. See, there were people supporting Donald Trump. They were not Republicans. I believe that. But you can't follow this. And I'm not trying to put Joe Biden down. Here's my point. Whether it's age, Joe Biden used to be, whether it's age or whatever else it was, the Democratic Party didn't have a leaner kid. And until the Democratic Party can bring a leaner kid who the people can see a goal, because remember, this is innate in us. This reaction is visceral. I can remember, this is the thing about being my age is kind of neat in a way, okay? It gives me a different perspective in formulating these things. Bill Clinton was a leaner kid. And I know people that were not Democratic, they voted for Bill Clinton. Hillary, and I know Hillary was a leaner in the home. I know that, I can tell because of her relationship with her daughter. But was not presented that way, though, out in the public. You got to have a leaner kid. Barack Obama took places, he carried areas of the country where it was not normal for that to happen. But he did because he was a leaner kid. Shift back to Republicans, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan would have been the leaner kid. People still talk about Ronald Reagan. But Donald Trump exemplified the leaner kid in this last election. He made it clear what the goal was. And he worked hard toward that goal. And even almost getting assassinated, he still kept leaning toward that goal. People can't help but follow that. They had no choice over here. Had no choice. So now I want to, and for the Democratic Party to have a chance, they got to have a leaner kid. Someone who can work that hard. Now, Donald Trump worked hard. His kids say Dad was the first one in office. He's the last one to leave. We hear that of the great people that do great things, whether it's a basketball player or a horse trainer. They're the first ones there. They really are the leaner kid. let's take this back now to what the attorney I showed this to told me. You see, James, what makes this kids on the line so powerful is when you start looking at it, you see these kids and you think about, well, it's just about these little boys. And you take it kind of lighthearted like that. But he said it draws you in. Do you realize you're not only looking at these kids, but you're thinking about family members. You're thinking about your employees. You're thinking about grandmama, granddad. What kind of parent do I have? And a teacher's thinking about their students. You start seeing these other people. Then he helped me. He really did help me, and I want to give credit for this. Sometimes I'm amazed at what's come through me and all the people that have helped me to be standing here to be able to present such a powerful tool. I really don't take a whole lot of credit for it other than trying hard to find something to help us where we are right now. But he said, James, there's a third part of that what it does, you realize it's you on that line. It's you on that line. Are you the leaner kid? Are you this kid? Here's how I explain that. If you had a goal, for example, say to run, here's how it works, okay? Let's say you say Monday morning, I want to run. I'm going to run 3 miles Monday morning, no doubt. Well, and you do it. Come Monday morning, you get those tennis shoes laced up and you hit the street, rain, shine, or whatever it might be. You see yourself as a leaner kid. You give yourself those kind thoughts, those kind words. You say, hey, it's pretty neat. What this pillar has taught me, though, is we treat ourselves exactly the way we treat the kids on the line or other people in our lives or just strangers or people that we see. Remember, we see loiterers like this, we treat them that way. Like, oh, I don't feel comfortable in here. Let's suppose you wake up and you say, okay, I've done it. I've had the rain, I've run, and you come back, you're going to feel that. But now let's suppose now on the second day, you watch the movie late the night before and you're a little bit tired. And you say, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to run half of it, so I got to get to work, and then I'll run the other half later. Now you're starting to move down the line. You don't give yourself the same kind of energy that you would on the first day. So now let's go to the third day, and you say, oh my gosh, I ate too much, and I just don't feel it today. Now you're going down this line, and so what happens is depression, all kind of things set in because what you hear is not the kind, sweet words. You don't get that internal support. So now you might be even by this time saying, well, if you don't get off you start to get into the name calling. People do it all the time when I show this. Even to the point of get this person out of my sight. This, as the scale goes, this is where depression comes in, being out of balance. You remember, to me, suicide is pretty easy to understand. When we get to this point, remember what my Amish friend said? He didn't want to see him get that person out of my sight. So what my goal is, that by understanding that this is innate in us, as human beings, we're not all that complicated. And our reactions are visceral reactions. And so if I take you back again, think about, Donald Trump is still working. I still never hear him say, well, does he take a nap? It seems like he works all the time. It seems like he's always working toward a goal. That's a very powerful force. A very powerful force. And so as individuals, as a country, think about the teacher think about teachers having to deal with these kids. Don't you know, if you was a teacher, oh my gosh, what would it be like if you could just have these kids? But unfortunately, we're producing more on this side. And I believe when I first started this work, when I first discovered leaners and leaner kids, I still remember being like, whoa, I've discovered something that's almost a danger of extinction. And I realized that only leaners produce leaners. And so if you believe that only leaners produce leaners, if we have more than half the population producing non-leaners, that's scary. But there's something beautiful called the pendulum swing. And I'm hoping that it can go back the other way, that we do by having tools, having the right tools, knowing how to use those tools, that we can produce more of this. Because this is what makes us all healthier, happier, and it helps us have a balance. It's the area where that love for that person is just drawn to it. We want to help that person achieve their goals. Now, there's a very important point that I want to touch on here, or focus on. All the times I've presented this, and it's been many, many times across the country and different age people, no one has ever asked what race these kids were. Remember, no one has ever asked if they could run before. No one's ever asked me, is this kid overweight? Is this kid slim, tall? No one's ever asked a question like that. So the point I want to make is, it doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter where you are. If you have a goal, and we know what your goal is, and you're leaning toward that goal, we can't help but want to just give you that energy to help push. It reminds me of a story about a guy. I told me one time, he said he used to do a lot of work by hand, but he worked hard with a shovel. He said a banker one day just offered, like, I see how hard you work. I see how hard you're working toward that goal. He offered to finance a backhoe for him, which changed everything. The guy became pretty successful. But bankers, teachers, think of the stock market, for example. When the stock market knows where someone is going, the stock market reflects very quickly. If you know where you're going, the stock market goes up. Think of Tesla right now. There's this thing about like, where's Elon? Where's Tesla? And the stock market reflects that. We cannot follow unless we know what the goal is, and someone's working toward that. And you remember a while ago, almost everyone will bet $5 on a kid, this kid, who shows up ready to go with the goal in mind, and they've never seen him run. That's our nature. We will follow that kid and support it. So thank you for all the people out there who did it interactively and for helping me to explain. But now it's so simple that if you have a child, I've done that with my kids, and I've done that with kids who are having problems, to say people can't give you the kind words if you're over here. And I had a young man, I'll share this in closing, had a young man tell me one time, he said, I understand now why my mom can't give me the same voice. I didn't ask for this, I was just showing it to his mom. And a teenage boy saw this. He spoke up and he said, I can see now why mom can't give me that same kind of voice that she does like my brother. Because I'm not that kid over here. So I'm hoping you can take this tool and use it, share it, because it is a powerful tool. Thank you.